Have you ever really thought about how ancient cultures explained where they came from?
Mm.
Especially with these huge, like, global catastrophes in their stories.
Mm.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into the very first mythological inhabitants of Ireland. And you'll find their story connects in a really surprising way to, one of the biggest stories ever told, Noah's Ark and the Great Flood.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, this dive is grounded in some fascinating old Irish chronicles. We're talking foundational texts like the Leabhar Gabhála Érenn, that's often called the Book of Invasions.
Right.
And also the Annals of the Four Masters, which is another big compilation of Irish history, legend, all mixed together.
Okay.
And our mission really is to unpack how these medieval Irish writers wove their own local legends, their pre-Christian history, how they mesh that with biblical stories. It gives you some pretty surprising insights into how cultures build their origin narratives.
Okay, so let's get into it. The very first group said to land in Ireland, where it's led by someone, well, kind of unexpected, Cesaire, and she's presented as Noah's granddaughter. Noah's.
Yeah, Noah himself. According to these sources, Cesaire leads this group, 50 women and just 3 men.
50 women, 3 men, wow.
And their trip to Ireland, this huge journey, it had a very specific goal: escaping the biblical flood that was coming.
And the reason they had to make this journey themselves is pretty wild, too. These Irish myths say Noah actually refused. He wouldn't let Cesaire's father, Bith, and his family onto the ark.
Exactly. So they basically had to DIY it. Sarah and her group build their own ships, 3 of them, like 3 mini arks, you could say, to go find refuge somewhere else.
3 arks. Incredible.
And what really stands out is the timing. These old texts are so specific. The Annals of the Four Masters puts Cesaire's arrival in Ireland at 2361 BC.
Okay.
And the Lebor Gabhála Érenn even says she landed just 40 days before the flood finally hit.
40 days. Wow, that's cutting it fine.
Right. They just about made it before the world basically ended for a while. And this precise dating, it really shows you what those medieval monks were doing. They were deliberately trying to line up Ireland's beginnings with Christian history, sort of knitting Ireland into that universal biblical timeline.
That is incredibly close timing. And it raises some big questions, doesn't it? Like, first off, why would Noah turn away his own son, Bith, who, by the way, isn't even in the Bible's list of sons? That's just Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
A very good point. It's a notable absence in the biblical text, but he's right there in the Irish version.
And then why Ireland specifically? It's called this land untainted by sin. That sounds pretty significant, like a chosen place.
It does. And then there's the whole setup, 50 women and just 3 men trying to build a civilization basically overnight.
Yeah, the logistics seem challenging.
Challenging is one word for it. The texts are brutally honest, even mentioning that at least one of the men died from sexual exhaustion.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. So it strongly suggests there's more going on here than just a simple story. Today we might look at it and think about genetic preservation, maybe keeping certain bloodlines going.
Like a bottleneck.
Sort of, yeah. But back then, in that medieval context, it probably symbolized something more like a divine command to continue life, or maybe just the sheer struggle of starting over against impossible odds. And this whole idea of Bith being rejected and Ireland being untainted, it feels like a deliberate statement about Ireland's unique destiny, its purity.
So despite this amazing escape plan, getting there just in the nick of time, Cesaire's people didn't actually escape the flood in the end.
No, sadly. They reached Ireland, but the floodwaters eventually caught up with them and they all perished. Except for one. One person from that original group did survive the Great Flood. That was Cesaire's husband, Fintan Bóchra.
Okay, so how did he manage it?
Well, Fintan's story is pretty out there. One version says he turned into a salmon.
A salmon.
Yep. Lived for a year underwater in a cave called Fintan's Grave. Then he shapeshifted again into an eagle, then a hawk. Then finally, back to human form. And supposedly lived for, get this, 5,500 years to tell everyone what happened.
5,500 years. Okay, that's quite a survival story. Is there another version?
There is, yeah. A slightly less magical one suggests he just hid out on a hill called Tuatha Dé, which overlooks the River Shannon, just waited it out up high.
Right.
But there's another intriguing little detail. Somewhere along the line, Fintan was apparently given some kind of mysterious fruit by a stranger, and that fruit is what gave him the power to transform.
The fruit. That sounds symbolic.
Highly symbolic. It's not just a random detail. It hints at something deeper, maybe, acquiring secret knowledge or some kind of initiation, ancient wisdom, maybe even immortality, given that incredible lifespan.
So much packed into that one character.
Definitely. But it's really, really important for us and for you listening to remember what we're dealing with here. This is mythological time, not, historical fact as we understand it now.
Right. Context is key.
Absolutely. The Leabhar Gabhála Érenn, where a lot of this comes from, it wasn't even written down until the 11th century CE.
Wow, much later.
Much later, by medieval Irish monks. And their goal was pretty clear. They want to weave Ireland's pagan past into the Christian framework, make it all fit. So what we're reading is an Irish Christian take on their own prehistory.
So these stories tell us less about literal events and more about how, say, 11th century Irish culture saw itself, how they made sense of their world.
Exactly. It's a window into cultural identity formation, how they connected their unique local stories to these big universal narratives like the flood.
Okay, so Cesaire's people were first, but they didn't last. They weren't the only legendary group to show up in Ireland, though, right?
Not by a long shot. After the floodwaters went down, the myths say other groups came, distinct waves of settlers, each one leaving some kind of mark.
So who was next?
The second wave, according to the legends, was led by a guy named Partholón.
Partholón.
Him and his people, they're said to have come from the Middle East. Sometimes their ancestry is even traced back to Japheth, another one of Noah's sons.
Another biblical link.
Right, trying to keep that connection going. And Partholón's group, they get credit for bringing big changes to Ireland, things like farming, agriculture, raising animals, real foundational stuff.
But did they last?
Sadly, no. Their time was limited, too. After about 300 years, the story goes, a terrible plague swept through and wiped out his entire community. Just gone.
Another dead end. So after Partholón?
After Partholón, we get Nemed and his followers. They're often called the Nemedians.
Nemedians. And where did they supposedly come from?
Well, some versions point towards Scythia. That's sort of near modern-day Central Asia, so a different direction again.
Okay. And how do they fare?
Their time in Ireland sounds like one long struggle, basically.
Yep.
They were constantly fighting battles with the Fomorians.
Fomorians.
Yeah.
They sound ominous.
Yeah, they're depicted as this race of, chaotic, almost demonic beings, sometimes seen as primordial giants or sea dwellers. They often represent the kind of wild, untamed forces of nature, or maybe even earlier, monstrous inhabitants of the land.
So constant conflict.
Relentless conflict, and in the end, many of the Nemedians died fighting, or they were just forced to flee Ireland altogether, which, sets the stage for the next group.
It's like waves crashing on a shore, one after another. Who came after the Nemedians? Before we get to the really famous Tuatha Dé Danann.
Before the Tuatha Dé, we get the Fir Bolg.
Fir Bolg, okay.
Their origin is often said to be Greece, though, again, there are theories linking them maybe to older migrations, Indo-European groups, maybe New Eastern peoples. It kind of reflects these broad, ancient movements of people.
Right. So what was their role?
The Fir Bolg actually managed to establish themselves properly. They became rulers of Ireland for a time, and they're remembered in the myths as builders. They're credited with Ireland's first big forts, major settlements.
So they had a more lasting impact, it sounds like.
For a while, yes. They were seen as establishing a kind of order. But their reign eventually came to an end when they were defeated by the next arrivals, the really powerful, magical Tuatha Dé Danann. And that kicks off probably Ireland's most famous mythological era.
Okay, so we've covered quite a sweep of these very early foundational myths. Cesaire, Partholón, Nemed, Fir Bolg. It's clear these stories, even though they're mythological, they're incredibly important, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. There's so much more than just old legends or fairy tales. They give us these deep insights into how a culture perceived itself, how people throughout time really try to explain where they came from.
And how they weave these almost universal stories like a massive flood into their own specific local history.
Exactly that. The enduring power of myth, I think, is how it can carry these really profound ideas. Ideas about surviving catastrophes, the importance of who you come from, your lineage, and just the sheer resilience you need to start over again.
They're like coded messages about survival and identity.
In a way, yeah. They're a testament to that fundamental human need to understand our origins, to make sense of our place in the grand scheme of things, in the cosmos.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given us a fascinating look at that blend, that mix of purely Irish mythology and these imported biblical narratives that really shaped Ireland's origin stories.
It really has, and it does make you wonder, doesn't it? You look at these Irish stories, What other ancient myths, origin stories from other parts of the world, might also be these kinds of coded records, maybe records of actual deep historical events, migrations, maybe even, like you hinted at, efforts to preserve certain genetics or cultures passed down for generations but wrapped up in myth.
And how do all these different cultures take those universal themes, creation, destruction, survival, rebirth, and weave them into their own unique patterns, their own beliefs? It shapes not just how they saw their past, but who they are today.
Definitely something to think about long after we finish here.
Absolutely. Gives you a whole new lens for looking at mythology. Have you ever really thought about how ancient cultures explained where they came from?